So, resuming the talk, basically the clinical target volume is an anatomical concept, and it requires knowledge of anatomy and the spread patterns that one may have in a particular tumor or tumor site. And for that, we need to have clinical information or surgical report for us, or at times from the autopsy series, we get to understand what the spread pattern is like. Spread pattern, normally it occurs, the spread occurs either submucosally or through lymphatics or even hematogenous at times, and also when the surgeon tampers with the site, that is the post-op situation. Submucosal spread is something that we are going to talk about, and usually it is anywhere between 2 to 30 millimeters. 2 millimeters is very occasionally seen, and it is seen in tumors such as, the early, there's somebody who's raising the hands. Um, okay, just 1 second. Rashi, you may be able to, or Arun, just look into the people who are raising the hands. Okay,
Yes, ma'am.
so very occasionally we see the spread of about as little as 2 millimeters, and that too, say, for instance, in early larynx. Similarly, another outlier or a specific situation is hypopharynx, posterior pharyngeal wall, which actually has spread, which may spread up to 30 millimeters. The propensity to spread is actually dependent upon, is multifactorial. It depends upon the tumor stage, size, thickness, differentiation, and lymphovascular invasion and all. The idea is that we tend to encompass the entire area, whatever we can, wherever the disease is spreading, even microscopically. Okay, so just like the primary, the gross lymph node also has the potential to spread around microscopically, just around it. So you might find microscopic cells just around the lymph nodes, or around, or else they might invade the fascia that is lying close by, or even the muscle that is sitting close by. And that all these need to be encompassed. So apart from microscopic disease, we come to the concept of subclinical disease in the lymph node bearing region. What is that? The disease that might manifest later, but today, as of now, there is no documentation of tumor cells within the tissue, but at a later date, there is a predilection that the disease might come up, and that is subclinical disease. So this is usually found around the lymph node bearing regions. The lymph nodes are not involved. So what we do is that we look into the anatomy and delineate the anatomy wherever the lymph nodes are likely to be present. And that takes care of the subclinical disease on an elective fashion, in an elective fashion. In this, there's another situation that we often deal with, and that is the post-op. There was a gross tumor, the surgeon removed it. Today, there's no GTV. Apart from the fact that the surgeon removed the GTV, the anatomy and the vascularity also got tampered with, and it's just grossly disturbed. So we need to encompass the area where the tumor was. That is there. We also need to include the area where the spillage might be. So we focus on the entire post-operative bed when we are talking about post-op situations. Now, coming to how do we find our CTV in a particular case? We have a gross tumor, we can't see the CTV, so we expand the GTV in a particular dimension. So do we expand in all directions uniformly, or do we are we selective? The meaning thereby that does the tumor microscopic spread, does it occur uniformly, or does it have certain or spread liking? So the answer is no, it does not spread uniformly. Tumor cells, like anything in life, follow the path of least resistance. The microscopic cells, by passive free diffusion, move into the area where there is gravity or where there is free passage for them. Wherever they encounter barrier, they stop short over there. So when we are expanding for our CTV, we need to look into the natural barriers. For instance, if the tumor cells hit the bone and the bone is not involved, then we need to edit out the bone. Similarly, the air cavity. And on the same lines, if on the planning system, your CTV expansion is going into the air or outside the body, you need to actually edit it out. The reverse is also true. Now, if the tumor has managed to cross the natural barrier, or it has managed to cross, say, the midline, then you need to encompass that generously. You edit your CTV, include that portion generously in your CTV. So, although there are guidelines which we are going to talk about today, but a lot of it still remains, experience based, and especially the nuances of each case need to be tackled at an individual level, and so we need to have more expertise, experience, and training on this account. A word about planning CTV, planning target volume. Now, unlike the CTV, which is an anatomical concept, this is a geometric concept, in which the envelope of PTV tries to encompass the CTV in all phases of treatment. And the idea behind is that the CTV gets the prescribed dose during the entire treatment. It obviously takes into account uncertainties that exist in the planning or treatment delivery in your particular setup. And it is designed actually to take care of all the setup errors and internal organ motion. Now, if you look at the picture, this is the famous figure from ICRU reports, and this actually takes into account the margin that you can safely adopt for your PTV in different scenarios, and what would happen if you were to, if the OAR was, the organ at risk was to come very close to your PTV or your CTV. How do you deal with that situation? So with that, now I come to the head and neck cancers proper. And we all know that these tumors are, this is a very complex site. All structures are actually sitting and they are lying in a very compact fashion in this small region. And so to treat a tumor in this region is always a very challenging task, because the tumor needs to be adequately treated. At the same time, you need to take care of the some very radiosensitive neighboring structures and not give them radiation as far as you can help it. So the target volume delineation becomes very critical in this site and in each case that you plan. So like in any other site, gross tumor volume or the GTV needs to be mapped out for starters, and that you do by gathering clinical information. You take into account the information that you get from endoscopic evaluation, diagnostic imaging, be it CT scan, MRI, or PET scan. Now, like in general, imaging is all important. We've discussed that. But we also know how a suboptimal imaging actually can be hazardous, because you lose out on vital information, and that can be detrimental towards long-term outcomes. So what is optimal imaging? Optimal imaging would be when you're taking first a diagnostic scan from a contemporary machine, and that too within, say, about a month of the planning procedure that you are contemplating. The patient during this scan should be in a comfortable position, so that your anatomy is not disturbed. And then you should have adopted optimal protocols or templates for field of view, slice thickness, and contrast protocol. As far as can be helped. There should be no artifacts. So artifacts arise oftentimes from dental amalgams and material, because they kind of create artifacts, and that leads to degradation of the quality of image, and thereby eventually the loss of information. Radiological imaging, be it CT scan, MR, or PET CT, we know overestimates the gross disease. This is a studied fact, but it's actually happily oblivious of the microscopic extension, because those are not visible to human eye or imaging, and so for that we have to bank upon the histopathological reporting only. Uh, as far as the imagings are concerned, we have our because we need them to find out to map them, and also to find the areas of predilection of spread. So we have the preferences also. For instance, MRI scan is preferred for say oral cavity and oropharyngeal lesions, because the soft tissue extensions are better studied in that. For laryngeal hypopharyngeal tumors, because you may need to study the swallowing or speech difficulties, CT scan has holds preference. And for PET CT, you can say that it's largely for locally advanced or metastatic tumors, because for smaller tumor, the spatial resolution for PET camera is not that much, and there is partial voluming that is happening. So all this limits accurate delineation for smaller tumors, and so it's not a great investigation for them. So when we are talking about CT, we are looking into extensions and infiltrations of subclinical disease in the area around. But how do we expand? How do we expand the GTV into a CTV, which is likely to harbor all these diseases? Largely, there have been two schools of thought. One is that you identify the where the GTV is located, what is its dimensions and T-stage, and then look into what anatomical compartment we are talking about, and encompass that entire compartment in that high risk zone. This is a safe practice, and this is what UK based practice has been all about. It's actually extension of the 2D plannings that at least we in our generation were used to doing at some point in time. So it's safe, but then it is equally difficult to spare surrounding structures in this kind of a protocol or practice. Dahanka has given preference to expansion of GTV to a CTV. So geometrically, they tend to expand, say, about by 10 millimeters, are all around the tumor, which is what you see in this particular CT slice at the coronal and the axial slices. So how did we arrive at this figure of 10 millimeter? It didn't happen entirely empirically, but based on the retrospective studies that we have available in literature. So this particular study is from Alabama group, the Bonner group actually, from Alabama, where they retrospectively audited about 85 patients and saw that some physicians they actually included the entire anatomical compartment, say in about 15 patients, and the rest resorted to geometric expansion. Then the cutoff of geometric expansion was actually variable that the physicians adopted, but the median was 15 mm. So they looked at the long-term failure results and the expansion, how that impacted upon the long-term failure. What they did was that they subgrouped it into less than 15 millimeters and more than 15 millimeters and the anatomical compartment. They found that actually it is not significantly different. So they felt that anything less than 15 millimeter of expansion might be safe. So then comes the role for guidelines for these geometric expansion and delineation. Obviously, to set up guidelines, you needed proper patient selection. That was a must, because ultimately these guidelines would help the radiation oncologist to delineate the target volumes as accurately as possible based on the biology and the location and the stage of the tumor. It would help us reduce our interclination variability. And with the now that we have entered in the 3D CRT and MRT era in a big way, they become the need of the hour. So first and foremost came the guidelines which were designed for the node negative necks, and these were published in 2003. So basically what was happening was Robin, other groups, they were all having their own guidelines to identify different levels of the neck. This is the first time in neck region that the consortium was set up and consensus was built as to let us define the boundaries of the lymph nodes, the levels of lymph nodes within the neck, and they were defined for us, and they could identify, okay, this is the level you would include for this particular site, even if the node was negative. Then in 2006 came the guidelines. The Gregoire and the team, they actually did consensus building exercise and came up with the guidelines for node positive and post-op neck. So they came up with the recommendation for individual situations, like for instance, level 2 group of lymph nodes, if they were involved, then you are to include the entire retrostyloid space right up to the base of the skull. If we talk about lower down neck, if level 4 or level 5B are involved, then we include the entire supraclavicular fossa. If there is the lymph node abuts the muscle, then you must include the muscle, that particular muscle, say for instance sternocleidomastoid, you include in that level of node. And of course, you include, because you take care of the microscopic extension all around the neck, you include 1 centimeter of margin all around it. If the node is sitting at the junction between two levels, then you include both the abutting levels in that high zone region. Now, if it is a post-op situation, then in that case, you have to include the tumor bed and the regions where there could be possibly surgical spillage. So that would be the post-operative bed, and the entire bed needs to be included. However, your target remains the post-operative bed, which includes the tumor, where the tumor was lying, and the points of surgical spillage. It does not mean that you chase the last bit of the graft that is there. Finally, after a long wait, we could have a consensus building for the CTV identification of the primary sites of head and neck region based on all the groups and their philosophies. So here we talk about these guidelines. They recommend that we start to move from anatomical concept to GTV to CTV expansion. And the I just request the person to mute themselves. The isocentric geometric expansion of the GTV primary was recommended, along with correction of natural boundaries. So the concentric ring that forms around the GTV is that you need to deliver by the PTV. I'm sorry, this should be have been the CTV P2. This concentric P1, this concentric ring becomes your high risk or therapeutic risk region, and that becomes the GTV plus 5 mm. Beyond this, another rim could be created, and that is that talks about the additional 5 mm that need to be concentrically or isotropically added on. That forms the intermediate risk, and that becomes what is known as the CTV P2. This is these kind of 5 plus 5 for the high risk region and 5 for the intermediate risk region were actually this information was derived from the operative T1, T2 tumors, and what we needed to look into was the safety of this expansion. So the emerging data from pathology series actually showed that whether it's a small T1 or T2, the infiltrative patterns were not very different in the studies that were looked into. And so, as far as can be judged, there's no clear data on the difference in infiltration as a function of tumor volume or tumor location. Of course, you have to take into account the natural barriers. So based on this, one could kind of safely say that, okay, 5 plus 5 might be working, which is what the Dahanka group has been propagated. And I'll just delve into the direct evidence they have taken from the largely from the 3 studies that they mention in their publication. And these are histopathological studies where they looked into the tumor spread, microscopic spread of the tumor beyond the edge of the gross tumor. They did not exactly look into the tumor budding pattern or isolated tumor cells or the worst pattern of invasions, because at that point in time, that neither were these terminologies extensively understood, nor were they extensively considered. They have partly kind of considered these also. So if we look behind these studies, mostly tongue cancer studies, and what they they looked into was that, let us look where the 95% of the microscopic infiltration is occurring beyond the gross tumor, and let us look at the last of the projection, the maximum peak of the tumor cell. Where is it reaching up to beyond the edge of the tumor? So what they've seen is that the maximum tumor infiltration is to the tune of about 7.8 mm in one of the studies. And the 95% of the tumor cells were seen to be infiltrated in around 3.95 millimeters from the gross tumor edge, which means if we follow this 5 plus 5 pattern, that means if you've included the 5 millimeter, you created a concentric ring around 5 millimeter, you are safely including 95% of the microscopic infiltration. If you're including the next 5 millimeters in your CTV, then you are actually even taking care of the maximum areas or satellite areas where the tumor could have infiltrated, because that's roughly about 8 to 10 millimeters. So that safely they are putting their bet on 10 millimeter. This has also been corroborated by the surgical series where they've studied the margins, and they've since the time we can remember, 5 millimeter has been a safe margin from the surgeon's perspective, when they've seen that the local regional recurrence rates are actually are more when the tumor is sitting 1 millimeter within the surface, or about 2 millimeter, beyond which it starts to plateau. There's no difference. So once again, 5 millimeter as the high risk zone seems to be a fair enough concept. Now people are also looking into the emerging concepts of worst pattern of invasion and tumor bedding or isolated tumor cells, because they seem to be having a role, at least in the smaller studies that are coming up in the local control of these tumors, and they need to be somewhere along the line grafted in our studies. So this is just by way of example, want to say this CA base of tongue. This is a cartoon that I created, that we try and expand the tumor into a high risk zone, respecting the normal boundaries, and similarly for the intermediate risk, and as far as possible respect the normal boundaries. So what are these normal boundaries? How do we respect them? How do we make the necessary modifications or tuning once we have expanded 5 plus 5? By and large, we need to adapt. We need to take care and edit out the air cavities, because tumor will not move into, go and spread into the air cavities. We need to adapt for the complex anatomy, which means that there are soft tissue structures which are abutting against each other. They are sitting in a compact fashion alongside, but they are not contiguous. For instance, if there is a soft palate CTV and there is the CTV is going into the mobile tongue, a small tumor, if it is there in soft palate, it is unlikely to move into the mobile tongue, and you can safely edit at least a slice of mobile tongue. Similarly, strong anatomical barriers where free tumor diffusion is prevented because of the barrier, you can edit that out. Also, you must factor in the experience of surgical series and take that into account. Smaller tumors, for instance, if there's a smaller tumor, they've been taken care by lasers or TORs or something, you're expecting high tumor control, you may want to modify your margins accordingly. A practical tip that the authors give us is that you actually first expand the PTV, and then, because you know for sure that PTV1 will lie, the CTV-P1 will lie inside the intermediate risk zone in all at all times in all slices. So then you look into the CTV-P1 later after expanding the P2. So by way of example, these are very busy slides, and you can go and look up the manuscript, which describes very beautifully each site for us. Let's just look into, by way of example, the oral cavity cancers. I'll just draw your attention to, please look at the CTV-P1. This is the high risk zone. And then we will talk about the CTV-P2. Now, if you look at the CTV-P1 and you look at the tumors from T1 to T4, you will find that everything is identical because you drew the GTV and then you expanded by 5 millimeters isotropically, and you edited it for bone and ear. That is what you do irrespective of the T state. Now let's move on to CTV-P2, which is the intermediate risk CTV. That's where you need to focus on the modification. So once again, here you do draw GTV-P, and then you give a 10 millimeters expansion to it. That does not change, but based on the stage and based on the location or the site of the tumor, you start making your necessary modification. For instance, if you are talking about T1 tumor and it is away from the bone, you don't need to include the part of the bone at all. You edit it like you would do in a normal case. But if it is a tumor that is resting on the gingiva or hard palate or RMT, which is right next to the bone, then you might include a slither of the bone about 1 to 2 millimeters. If you move on to T2 tumor, then you might include more of bone, that is 5 millimeters. If we talk about soft tissue, the location, if it is a floor of mouth, then you include your CTV, tweak it at mylohyoid muscle. But if you move to in T2s, in T1, you don't need to include that. In T3, you have to include the mylohyoid muscle also. So this is how we progress. If I'll just give you another example of oropharyngeal cancers, again, in the high risk zone, nothing changes. You expand by 5 millimeters and edit for bone and ear. In the CTV-P2, the intermediate risk zone, you expand for 10 millimeter and then start looking what is the location, what is the T state. If it is a tonsillar primary and you are talking about T1, you include the superior constrictor, but you don't need to include the parapharyngeal space. However, if it is a T2 tonsil, you include the superior constrictor and you also include the parapharyngeal space, but you don't need to include the medial pterygoid. If you move further ahead, you there is a requirement. If you talk about T4s, then you also include the medial and lateral pterygoid. So that's how we move on. Similarly, for vallecula, in T1, you don't need to include pre-epiglottic space, but you start needing to include pre-epiglottic space when you're talking about T3s and T4s, not in T3s. Just one interesting fact in laryngeal cancers, here in the T1 glottis, where you are just restricting yourself to the glottic region, you just need to have single high risk expansion, and that is your CTV-P1, that is GTV-P plus 5 millimeters of expansion, and no intermediate risk is recommended. So that's how we move ahead in these, and this requires experience, practice, and training. Now, obviously, they've also, at the end of the publication, they've also gone on to propose that you might have implications on dose prescription. And it is possible that you might consider that high risk zone might get, may get equivalence of 70 gray at 2 gray per fraction. Intermediate risk, you might lower it to 60 gray. And prophylactic zone, if you are considering either in the primary, but more so in case of elective lymph node bearing region, you go ahead with equivalence of 50 gray at 2 gray per fraction. So, although the guidelines were published in the year 2018, barely 18 months from today, the group has been practicing this for some time, and they've published their consequences of this kind of expansion, their experience. So what they feel is that at the end of the day, it's easier to do this geometric expansion, but it does require modification. It does offer lesser variability between oncologists, and the practice can be, you can afford a consistent practice, which is what they say that they can state at the end of 3 years. This is just by way of example. I don't know if you can see that a small base tongue tumor and how small your geometric expansion can be, beyond which you give a PTV and place your fees. And this is how large your anatomical expansion can appear to be. This is what we practice incidentally, and I'll come on to the reason why. A bit about PTV expansion. Well, PTV expansions from CTV are based on your own setup. Each center should look into their setup experience and actually come up with their PTV, and they are all largely dependent upon the immobilization protocol that you practice, how you do and how often you do your QAs of your infrastructure or machine, what is the verification equipment that you use, what is the verification protocol, and the location of CTV. This particular publication, this work has been done by one of my colleagues, Dr. Verma, who has actually audited the PTV setups before 2011 and subsequently in 2013, when we changed our practice to an extent. And today, as of now, our practice is to expand the CTV to PTV expansion is 5 mm in head neck sites, and world over, I think it's around 3 to 5 mm, depending upon what your center adopts. And so each center should do their own. That's the bottom line. Coming back to the CTV P expansion, 5+5 expansion, is it generalizable to all situations? Well, not really. There are situations where either it's completely not applicable, or you may have to adopt extensive caution, like you have to exercise a great degree of caution. For instance, in post-operative situations, we've discussed this, that there are chances of spillage. So your CTV actually becomes very spread out and vague, and you have to include the entire bed, and 5+5 may not be an option. Recurrent tumors, if they are diffuse and infiltrative type, if the anatomy has been disturbed, then you might not want to consider this kind of expansion. Post-NSCT, I will just allude to in the coming slides. Again, adaptive radiotherapy. Then comes in the situations where the spread patterns are different, like in situ tumors, other histology. I'll just talk about it. Regarding advanced tumors, I'm not saying that we can't do, but the fact is that we still have information only from early tumors and surgical series. So shall we extrapolate it to this expansion into advanced tumors? Well, time will tell. We can't say for sure. The literature will give us the answer. So coming to post-neoadjuvant chemotherapy, we know, okay, so neoadjuvant chemotherapy is got weak evidence in head neck cancers. In fact, it has shown insignificant benefit in the meta-analysis. In the meta-analysis, it's shown detriment as well. But it's still being practiced at least within India, and at least in the government hospitals, simply because of the logistic reasons and the overload at the machine and waiting list. So we are there. It is there with us even today. Now, in that case, we need to look into all the tumors that we give neoadjuvant chemotherapy. Obviously, they are responding tumors to some extent, and they the tumors shrink. But what we don't know is what the regression pattern. How do they shrink? Do they implode inside? Are they leaving satellite areas behind, or there is patchy resolution? This is something that is not known to us. So giving 5+5 expansion might be difficult. This is just a cartoon that I've picked up for simplistic reasons, that the tumor was given neoadjuvant chemotherapy. It did sort of show some kind of response, but the size was not, the post NACT size was not very different from the pre NACT size if you look at the histology, the regression pattern of these tumors. So the bottom line is that for induction chemotherapy, maybe it's a safer option that you still continue with the anatomical based CTV expansion. Similarly, for adaptive radiotherapy, it's not a routine clinical practice, but it is done in project mode or clinical trial setting. And you know that you are studying the variability. And in such tumors, we know that the regression is not happening, or the migration of the normal structures or the tumor is not happening, concentrically or uniformly every day that we are practicing. So in such a dynamic status, it is difficult to keep practicing 5+5 expansion. I mentioned about other histologies, and they have different spread patterns. The classic example being adenoid cystic carcinoma, where perineural spread or neurotropism is a known fact. So here we know that Krelian nerves need to be traced up to a point in these tumors. And so the guidelines came up in 2018, and they have given us the contouring atlas for the for delineating which nerves and up to what point in these tumors in all these major salivary gland adenoid cystics. The limitation was that they did not use MRI to assess this delineation, and that was done deliberately to avoid because generalizability and fusion facilities may be limited in most places, and therefore we should know up to where to go if we are tracing the facial nerve or glossopharyngeal nerve. So I'll change gears and come to the throw some light on the failure patterns of with IMRT. A lot of us practice IMRT. We know it has a sharp dose gradient. So that is to our advantage. While at the one point that it treats the tumors well, it also spares the normal tissues. But if the tumor is not located within the IMRT zone that you are treating, then you are sure to have a miss. But when we look at the patterns of failure reports, we find that it is not these marginal misses that are reported, the miss that occurred because we missed the delineating that part of the tumor. It is not the marginal miss, but it is the infield recurrences. Infield recurrences means that the tumor failed in the heart of the gross tumor. And that can happen only because of aggressive biology. It is a reflection of biology. Now, while that one side is true, but then we must not forget that these were all studies where delineations were done properly, and they were done after adequate training, expertise, and experience had been gained. So comes the point that there are people who have compared high volume center outputs or results from low volume centers, and clearly there is a difference, because actually even the pattern of failure might be different if your training is suboptimal. So the bottom line is high throughput center where there are regular training programs happening, people are getting trained, they are looking into the nuances of each case. They are the ones where you will actually be able to delineate better, and therefore your long-term outcomes would be better. So in nutshell, I would like to say that target volume delineation is actually a team effort. GTV is the radiologist domain largely because they are the ones who can recognize the gross tumor or radiologically the tumor best. Of course, we need training to learn that art. CTV is actually radiation oncologist domain based on the experience. We are the ones who should be delineating safe CTVs for better long-term controls. PTV remains the physicist's territory, and we should relegate keep it to their domain only. So to conclude, based on ICRU report 50 and 62, the concept of GTV and CTV and PTV have actually helped us developing the treatment protocols better. They are all highly dependent on high quality imaging, which is what we should all focus at our places of practice. And because if it is not so, then delineation is weak, and even today, delineation would be the weakest link, and that has far-reaching consequences. There is a clear role for formulating guidelines, implementing guidelines, because that's the first step towards reducing delineation heterogeneity. And if you look at it, most people feel the need for guidelines. The second step, of course, is good training, because training is a must. And if you do not do that, it cannot be, a guideline can never be the reflection of universal practice. After all, worst complication that you can give to a patient is tumor recurrence, and that has to be avoided at all costs. So we have guidelines for node negative, node positives, post-op next. They are available for a long time now, and we are all used to practice. Those of us who are practicing 3D conformal, we are used to practicing these using these guidelines. And of course, the primary delineation guidelines are now in the new arrival section. They are recommended in trained hands, because they offer safety to the sparing of the normal tissue. They even offer lesser dose to the outer rim of CTV, the intermediate risk zone. So there are implications on dose prescription which this set of guideline has proposed. But of course, the impact on final clinical outcome is awaited, and we will wait for the studies for that as well. I would just like to wind up by saying that every step is important. We need to pay attention to all steps of radiotherapy planning if we actually wish to improve outcomes in our center. With this, I come to the end of my talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you, madam, for such comprehensive lecture. You have explained basics of target delineation and how these contouring guidelines have been evolved over time. Today we have learned a lot. As you mentioned, modification of CTV in case of adenoid cystic carcinoma. Can we apply same concept and modify CTV in a case of squamous variant of head and neck cancer with PNI? Ma'am, please.
Yes.
Yeah.
So these guidelines have been for PNI. They
Yeah.
have been largely set up. They have been, the atlas has come up for the major salivary gland tumor adenoid cystics, where they recommend that you must follow. Having said that, if there is, the histopathology shows gross perineural invasion or MRI shows, then you should always chase it to up to the, at least safely up to the base of skull. But even if you do not follow that, if you feel that there is the histopathology is showing some kind of perineural invasion and you cannot make out where it is, you widening your portals or widening your target volumes generously is a better idea.
Yes, ma'am. So that means we have, whenever we see a PNI in the report post-op SPR, we should track the involved node up to the base of skull, especially up to the foramen ovale and spinosum. And whether you also give some differential dose to that, if PNI is involved, you give a little higher dose to that CTV. Are
No,
you
no.
giving
As
a
of
profile?
now, we are giving. You're talking about post-op situation, Dr. Arun.
Yes, yes, ma'am. In the post-op situation, if we find PNI and we have tracked
Yes,
up to the base of skull, so how to give dose?
yes.
Whether we give a prophylactic dose to that side or we give higher doses, maybe 66 gray or 64 gray.
So I would like to just say this thing over here that no, we do not give higher doses. We don't give boost or top-up dose. there is across the Atlantic, there has always been this difference in school of philosophies. The UK based practice is actually based on the Fletcher's practice, which says that there is the high risk zone which needs at least equivalence of 70 gray. Then there is an intermediate risk, or the post operative zone, which needs 60 gray, and below this the subclinical zone needs about 50 gray or equivalent. Whereas the Americans feel that if you need to top it up by giving 4 to 6 grays extra. Now, firstly, that is that is backed by some literature, but it is the difficulty in giving and tolerating and sparing the normal tissues that actually stops us from topping up the dose beyond 60 gray. Even at times, if you're going up to base of skull, you may find it, or let's not talk about base of skull, in cases like nasopharynx, where optic apparatus is sitting right next door, you might find it difficult to go up to 60 gray also at times. So topping up is not what we consider, and we consider up to 60 gray, and which is what is the general practice.
Right, ma'am. We also follow the same. There is one question posted by Dr. Gaurav. Should we include entire flap in neck for post-op in case of post-op neck?
Yeah, so I did mention in my talk that actually it's the postoperative bed which is your target volume, which includes where the tumor was sitting earlier and wherever there are chances of spillage. So we are not chasing the last extension of the flap most of the times, but with reasonable assurance that that is not where the cells would have gone. Having said that, majority of your flap does come into the field, and it is actually an innocent bystander. That is how one would view it. But if you're suspecting that because the surgeon has been the tampering has been to an extent that you will have to, then you surely have to include the edges of the flap. That becomes an important point. So
Okay,
you'll have to individualize it.
Right, ma'am. Right. So, sometime when we give PTV over CTV, that PTV reaches up to skin. How much you recommend to crop PTV from skin or CTV from skin?
So CTV we crop about 3 millimeters from the skin. Because what our physics colleagues tell us is that the algorithm does not consider what is happening beyond that. So whatever you will get would be erroneous information. So we are within 3 millimeters of the skin.
Okay, right, ma'am. And one last question, I think, in case of buccal mucosa, post-op, when you recommend bolus or in any other situation also, when we apply bolus and how up to how much fraction?
Okay, so for buccal mucosa, wherever we are suspecting that the skin infiltration was there, and there is a possibility that the tumor cells microscopically would be in the leftover skin, or the edge of the skin, we should be we should be generous. Our threshold should be low towards using bolus. But yes, I agree that tolerance becomes an issue, especially skin tolerance. So although it's a value judgment, but clearly there is nothing, if you're suspecting that the tumor cells were reaching the skin, we would like to give bolus as far as we can help it. Unless you're dealing with a very elderly, frail, diabetic, and you know that he or she will not be able to tolerate it, that's where we might omit the bolus in the latter part of the treatment. Or we are finding that the reactions have increased to an extent that we need to actually remove the bolus. Other than that, we would keep the threshold towards using bolus in select situation low and try and give it for the entire treatment, because remember the planning was done with the bolus on. And sometimes the bolus is placed inside the cast. So then if you remove the bolus, then you change the patient contour and the planning. What you planned may not be what you delivered.
Ma'am,
Yeah,
Madam Iyer has asked, in case of CA buccal mucosa, if 1B node is positive, what should be our target volume?
Okay, so we've gone a lot of back and forth has happened on this single node 1B in buccal mucosa. So largely we were treating 1 to 3 ipsilateral at some point in time. Then the guidelines came and we were treating all levels. Once one node is involved, then all levels were included. However, with the latest reports that have come in, we still feel that you can individualize if the tumor is small, if the primary is small, the tumor thickness is not much, and there is only one small 1B lymph node which is positive, then you are still okay if you treat the ipsilateral 1 to 3 lymph nodes. But you do have to see whether you want to include 1A, you want to include the opposite side. You will have to individualize. There is a case, but after individualization.
One more question: in T1, T2 buccal mucosa N0, after adequate dissection, should we include neck? This
No,
question
you
is
can,
asked.
here you can omit.
Okay, ma'am. I think this was the last question.
yeah. I think Dr. Rasi, please give both of time. We should stop now. It is 9+.
Yes, thank you very much. I must thank all of you for giving this opportunity, because these are things that are of interest, and they are like everybody's day-to-day issues.
Yeah, Dr. P.K. Gupta has written, ma'am, this was very informative lecture. It reminded me the seminar room morning lecture at SGPGI.
Thank you, Pramod.
Thank you, ma'am. It's a very, very nice presentation, ma'am. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Thank you,
very much.
ma'am. Thank you.
Ma'am. If anyone wants to ask question, they can message me. I can WhatsApp to ma'am, and we can discuss. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Sure. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you all.